currently pursuing her BE in Electronics and Communication Engineering. She is a member of our college IEEE EMBS Society and the ERC Club. She has won the Mini Project Expo conducted by the Robotics Club and has also done other projects like Line Follower, Obstacle Avoider, and Computer Controlled Robot. Now, I'd like Ms. Jamuna to please start over today's session.
Okay. So a very good evening to one and all present here. So thank you for the beautiful introduction, Anjana. So before we dwell into today's topic, first let's see what we've done so far. So, okay, so this is what we've done so far. We have a player which moves in the left and right direction. We have an enemy which moves just about everywhere. And then we have a bullet. And last but not least, we have our very background image. So today we're going to start off with a really crucial topic. At least I believe it's really crucial because let's face it, what's the point of playing this game if the bullet just never hits enemy? So in order to make that happen, we need to know a small simple mathematical formula, the distance formula. So you guys would have probably studied that in your 11th or 12th, but if you didn't, I got you, okay? So this is the distance formula. So d is equal to square root of x2 minus x1 the whole square plus y2 minus y1 the whole square. So in order to import this, in order to implement this in Python, you have to use two basic functions, the math.how function and the math.sqrt function. So to use these two functions, you need to first import the math library. So without doing this, you can't even use these two functions. You will get an error. So make sure that you import those two functions. Import the library before you use these two functions. So, okay, so I shown you guys an illustration. So in this illustration, we have an enemy and a bullet. So let the enemy's coordinates be x1 and y1. Okay, so x1 and y1. So here in order we're gonna say that the bullet collided with how we're gonna, so which is necessarily enemy x minus bullet x, which is enemy x minus bullet x, and we've given 2 here because we want to the power of 2. So since we're making power, we're gonna use math.pow. So this is how you do this. And then for the same thing, enemy y minus bullet y, and then for the power you give 2. So math.pow. But if you see in the above formula, we add these two. So how do you add it? You just add these two, and then you give this whole thing in a square root. So how do we do that? So that's what we've done here. We have math.pow enemy x minus bullet x, this whole thing to the power 2, plus math.pow enemy y minus bullet y, the whole thing to the power 2. And since we want this whole thing to be square rooted, we're giving this inside math.sqrt, the function, okay? So now we know the distance formula, like how to calculate distance between the enemy and the bullet. So we're going to see how we're going to implement that. So for that, we're going to use a small function, a really easy function. Don't get scared about this function. So the function here is called isCollision. So this function has 4 parameters, enemy x, enemy y, bullet x, bullet y. So using these 4 parameters, we're calculating the distance as we've seen above. So we're going to say if the distance is less than 27, this function should return true. If it's not, then the function should return false. So let me just copy this and paste it in here. Okay. Okay. So I'll go up because that's where I have all my function definition. So I'll paste it here. Okay. So now that's done. Okay. So if you could see under math, we have small red color squiggly line. So why do we have that? We have that because I didn't import my math library yet. So I'll go up here and I'll import it. Okay. So now that that's done, if you see down here, you wouldn't have that squiggly line anymore. So we've done the function definition. So let's go back. So there's no point in creating a function if you never call it. So we have to call this function. So that's what we do here in the first line. So we're going to call the previous function, and then we're going to assign it to a variable called collision. So what we're going to do next is if the collision happens, that is if the variable collision is going to hold either two values, true or false. So if the collision happens, then it's true. So what do you do if that happens? You reinitialize the bullet. So what you do here is like before the collision happens, the bullet is still on the screen. But as soon as the collision happens, the bullet has to leave the screen. So for that, you're going to reinitialize the position. Okay. So since the bullet is not going to be on the screen anymore, you're going to reinitialize its state to ready. There's two bullet states, one ready, another fire. So fire means the bullet is already on the screen, and ready means the bullet is not on the screen and it's yet to be shot. Okay. So if the collision happens, we need the score value to get incremented. Okay, so that's what this line necessarily does. And to see if it's actually incremented, we're going to print the value. So this is what we have here. So let me copy this and I'll paste this into the program for you guys. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so I will give this under the bullet movement. Control C, my bad. I didn't copy it. Down. Okay, so now if you can see here, we have a red color squiggly line too. If you look closely, that is. I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but that necessarily means that I haven't declared this variable. So that's why it's giving me an error. So I'll go up and I'll declare my variable. So I've given it a comment here. So I'll just kill it. So now no more squiggly lines. So let's see if this has actually worked. So let me run it for you guys. So let's see if the collision happens. So if you see when the bullet hits my enemy, if you see the interpreter right here, you can see the 1. So if I hit it again, I'll get 2. I played really bad. Okay, so I hit it, so I got a 2. Okay. So I hope you guys understand that. So each and every time the bullet hits the enemy, a collision takes place and the score value gets incremented. So you can see that in the interpreter right here. Okay. So now we know that the bullet has collided, but there's no point in doing this game if the bullet just collides the enemy and the enemy doesn't die. The enemy should die and it should respawn to another position. So how do we do that? For that, we're going to use random.randint function. So what this function basically does is randomly places whatever you want in this coordinates. So I specify the coordinates as 0 and 800. So what would happen is along the x-axis, the enemy will get repositioned in the range of 0 to 800 anywhere, between this range anywhere. So I've given the same thing for the y coordinate too. So it would get repositioned in the range of 50 to 150, anywhere in this range. So this is what we do for respawning of the enemy, so that the enemy dies and it comes back alive in another place. So let me paste it inside the program for you guys so that you can see what actually happens. So I will give it here, right here, and let me run it for you guys and see if the collision actually takes place. Okay, so hopefully I hit the enemy. I didn't hit it. Okay, so if you could see, it respawned. I'm not good enough to hit this again, so we'll just close this. And then let's go back to our PPT. So now we've seen how to respawn the enemy. Like we've seen how to make the bullet collide with the enemy and how to make it die and come back to life. So we've seen that. And now what's the fun in having just one enemy? So let's create multiple enemies and have fun with it. So how do we do that? So in Python, if you want to store multiple stuff, you use list. List is like the best option. So what I'm doing here is this is all the enemy's parameters. So the enemy should have an image. The enemy should have an X coordinate. It should have a Y coordinate. This is the change along the x coordinate, and this is the change along the y coordinate. So each and every enemy is going to have each and every individual, like each and all of these, like all of these individually, it will have it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a list for each and every one of these parameters. So that's what we do here. So enemy image, we're going to have a list for that. Enemy X, a list. Everything gets a list. Okay, you want it or not, you get it. Okay, so here what we're doing is we're telling the computer how many enemies we want. So here in my program, I've used 8 enemies, but in your program, you can use how many ever you want. You could just go wild with it. But the thing is, the more number of enemies you have, the enemies will move in a cluster. It wouldn't look good. It wouldn't look very good to look at. I've done it with 1,000 enemies, and it didn't look good at all. So you could do whatever you wish to do. So let me just go back to my program, and I'll copy this. Oh, I'll copy this and let me paste it. I'll go up to my enemy section because that's where I do everything related to my enemy. More up. So this is the bullet section. This is the enemy section. So this is where I want it to be. So I'll just paste it right here. But if you see, like the parameters given below, enemy image, enemy X, enemy Y exchange, enemy X exchange. So these are all given just for one enemy. So we don't have one enemy, we have 8 enemies. So how do we make this available for all 8 enemies? So I use a simple function called dot append. So what this does is basically insert the value inside the list. So I'll cut this and I'll drop it inside this bracket. So I'm going to do this for each and every one of these parameters. Okay, so please kindly wait with me. So now that's on. So append the next. There we go. Control X. Dot append. Control X. And let me paste it in here. Dot append. Let me cut this and let me paste it here. So now I'm going to create a for loop for this so that it could keep looping. Okay, I'll tell you guys why I'm doing that in a minute. So first, let me create the for loop. So num of enemies, I'm going to give num of enemies inside the range because I want to have individual lists. Okay, I'll just type it up. I'll tell you guys in a minute. Okay. Okay, so this is the syntax. So what would happen here is basically first the I value would be 0. Okay, so the first thing is 0th enemy. I know that is not a thing, like there's nothing called as 0th enemy, but that is just how Python works. That's the syntax. So first you will have the 0th enemy. So what will happen is the 0th enemy will have an image. And then the 0th enemy will have an X coordinate. And then the 0th enemy will have a Y coordinate, and then an X change coordinate, and then a Y change coordinate. So here's the thing. You don't need to have like X change and Y change for each and every one because the change is going to be constant. Like it's not randomizing and you don't need multiple images for it. But just for like convenience, my convenience, I've given this as it is. But you could just not give a list for this. It's your wish in the end of the day. So I hope you guys understand why this for loop is there. So the 0th enemy will have all these parameters. The first enemy will have an image and an X coordinate, Y, X change, Y change. And then second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So that makes 8 enemies and we're done. Okay, so let's see if I get multiple enemies. Yeah. I got an error. Let's see what we've done wrong. Oh, okay. So it's not going to move just yet. We have one small tiny bit to do. We'll do it together, okay? Okay. So now we've created multiple enemies. We have to make them move, yeah? So how do we do that? We'll give this inside a loop. In a range num of enemies, and then don't forget the colon, you guys. So since this is a loop, let me mention which list I'm talking about, because each and every enemy has multiple stuff. So let me mention which I'm talking. Okay. So let me go here and get square bracket I. So what square bracket I does is mention which list I'm talking about and which particular enemy I'm talking about. So I'll give this for each and every one. And we're almost done. Okay. So now that we've done that, this gives the enemies movement. So it shouldn't just move. When the bullet hits the enemy, we should know if the collision has taken place. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this and we're going to paste this inside this for loop, if you guys could see. Okay, so I'll give collision here just for my reference. Okay, so now that we've done that, we have this. So now we need to draw the enemy. Like when the enemy dies and it comes back alive again, we need to draw it on the screen. Only then will it be visible. So let me cut that and let me paste that too. Okay, so the thing is, you guys have to make sure that these two functions aren't inside the elif function, because then you would get errors. Okay. Okay, so let me specify the list I'm talking about, like which enemy I'm talking about, and then we're good to go. Okay. Okay. And since this function has a parameter called I, let me mention that I, and let me go up to the function definition and mention that I there too. So it's right here. And let me specify which enemy image I want to blitz. Okay, so hopefully I didn't do any mistakes. Even if I did, we could correct that. Okay, so if you can see, I have multiple enemies. And let me, please wait, I'll hit enemy at least once. Okay, if you can see, I've done it. And I'm killing enemies. I'm really bad at it, but it is what it is. Okay, so now that I'm done with my part, okay, so let me tell you guys what's still left. So what we're gonna do is like each and every time I hit the enemy, the score is only coming on the interpreter, right? We don't need that. We're gonna make the score appear here in the right top corner. So that's one thing we're gonna do. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna insert cool background music and sounds and all those stuff. Like when the bullet leaves my spaceship, I want a sound. And then when the bullet hits my enemy, I want a sound. And when this enemy reaches the bottom, like right before my spaceship, when it reaches my base, I wanted to say game over because I'm dead. It like invaded my base. So yeah, so that's what's gonna happen next. And my friend Reshma will teach you guys that. So stay tuned. And I would like to hand over my session to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamuna, for your extraordinary session. Students can feel free to post your questions in the chat box, and the speakers shall answer your questions by the end of this session. Dear participants, you will be having a quiz session along with the feedback link for the program that will be posted in the chat box by the end of this session. Along with that, the GitHub link will also be provided to the students. The source of the entire game would be available there. You can use this to run the program and play around with the values. If you have any doubts with that, you can communicate through the chat box or also through the group so that you can make the most out of it. Before we proceed with our final session for the day, I'd like to share a few words about our next speaker. Miss Reshma is an alumna of Sacred Heart Matriculation Higher Secondary School. She is currently pursuing her BE in Electronics and Communication Engineering. She is a member of the IEEE EMBS Society and the ERC Club. Reshma has also completed movers, flyers, and PET conducted by YLE British Council. She has also hosted a webinar on virtual reality. Now I hand over the session to Ms. Reshma.
Thank you so much, Anjana, for that wonderful introduction. Good evening to one and all present here. I hope all of you guys are safe and sound. Now, before we could go for our session, I'd like to give a quick recap on what we did before. Now, a couple of minutes ago, my partner would have taught you guys on collision detection, that is how to make sure our bullets hit our enemies and make our enemies respawn. We also would have learned about creating multiple enemies to make our game much more challenging. So once we did all of that, your game should somehow look like this. Now, as you can see, there are multiple enemies, and I'm able to shoot one and make it respawn in a random position. And the same happens for the second enemy too. Like, I'm aware that this is the last session, so I pretty much saved the most fun and easy stuff for the last. In my session, we will be covering 3 topics. That is how to make our score appear on screen, how to get the game over once we fail to shoot our enemies, and my personal favorite part, how to implement background scores and background music. So without any further ado, let's just get to the first part, that is displaying our scores. Now, when my friend Jamuna would have run the game, you would have noticed the scores coming one below the other on the interpreter. I, on the other hand, don't really want it on the interpreter, but rather on my screen. So for that, I first create a variable called as font. And to that, I'm going to load my font using the library function, the function called pygame.font.font.
Reshma, you're not presenting your screen.
Yeah, thank you, Jamuna, for intimidating that. Apologies for the minor inconvenience. So let me just start from the top. Now, to create my score font, I first created a variable called as font. And using the statement called as pygame.font.font, I give 2 values inside the brackets. One is the location of my file in read mode, and the second is my size in which I desire my score to appear in. Now, I personally would recommend this site called as thefonts.com, where you can see all these fancy looking fonts. And here I've used the font called Games. But it's completely up to you though. You can use any font you want to make it look more appealing. So coming back to our game, to our source code. So once we have loaded our file in read mode and then given the size, we need to give our coordinates next. Now I want my score to appear on the top left corner on my screen. So I give my coordinates as 10 and 10 and assign them to the variables text x and text y. So we've loaded our font, we've given the size, and now we've given the coordinates. Next, I want it to be blitted on my screen. It is pretty much the same process as, blitting our spaceship, blitting our bullets, and blitting our enemies, except for one extra step. If you paid attention to the previous sessions, then this one will be pretty much a cakewalk for you guys. So first, I'm going to define a function called as show score. And then over here, I created a variable called as score. And over here, I'm going to render my font.render. The font in font.render is nothing but the variable font I created over here. So I render the font, and inside my brackets, I give a couple of attributes. The first one being the text I want to display, that is score and plus the score value. The second one is true because we are dealing with a true type font. TTF essentially means true type font. And the third is my RGB value, 255, 255, 255. Now RGB means red, green, and blue. And if we give all three of them as 255, it essentially means that my color is white. So I want it to be displayed in white. Now here you can see that instead of int, I've given string. So basically, the fact is that I don't want to be displayed in an integer type. I want to be displayed in a string data type. So we implement a method called as typecasting, where we convert something from one data type to another. So here I've given the data type that I want it to be converted in, that is in string format. And inside the brackets, I give my score value. So once we've rendered our font, we're going to blip it, that is draw it on screen using screen.blip. So I'm going to copy paste this inside my Pygame. So I'm going to give it right here. Paste it. Yep. And then I'm going to give the function definition. I'm going to copy it. Okay, I'm going to paste this as well. Paste it. Okay, completely failed to notice the command line over here, but that doesn't really matter though. I'm just going to give it on the top. Hashtag score font, just to make sure that we're dealing with our score font right over here. Now we've iterated time and again in every session that anything which we want to last should come inside a while loop. And just like that, I want my score to be persistent on my screen and not just like disappear or vanish anywhere. So just for that to happen, I'm going to call my function show score inside my while loop. So I'm going to copy this too. So only if I call my function, you will be able to see it on screen. So I'm just going to give it right under my player. And then Mr. Bracket over here. So with that, we are good to go. I'm just going to run my output. And there you go. You guys can see the score displayed on top. And as I shoot my enemies, my score keeps increasing, which is exactly what I've intended. See? 3, 4, and 5. Now, if you understood this part, then the game over part will be like pretty much similar, at least the first part alone. So the only difference in the first part is that over here, I created a variable called as font, and here I created a variable called as over_font instead to like distinguish between the two. And the method here is pretty much the same. I'm going to load my font using pygame.font.font, give the location and the size, which is 70 over here because I want it to be like big. I want it to be displayed big. And then I define something called as game over text. And then I create a variable called as over_text. And I render my over_font and give these attributes, that is the text I want to be displayed, true, and my color, which is white. And once we did that, we're going to blip it on screen and give the coordinates inside, that is 200 to 250. The reason why I gave 200 to 250 is that I want it to be displayed in the middle, exactly in the middle of my screen. So let me copy paste this. Okay. So I've given the command line game over font, and I'm going to paste it right under that. And next, I'll be displaying my function definition. So I'm gonna display it like just below our show score function. So I'm gonna paste this. Yes, so we've loaded our font, we've given our size, we've given the coordinates, and we managed to render and get the font on screen. Now, one thing I want to make sure Pygame does is that I want my game over text to be displayed once our enemies disappear. So here is the code for that. Fear not, because I'm going to explain this with a little illustration. The logic here is like really, really simple, and once you understand it, you'll be able to like get the gist of it. So here is, just assume this is my game window. The yellow color oval over here is my spaceship, and the hexagon thing over here are my enemies. So I need to make sure that if one of my enemies at least reach 400 pixels, oh, just use it. My bad. Okay, I'm gonna write 400. So once one of my enemies reach 400 pixels in the y-axis, I want them to drop down until it's 2000 pixels. Apologies for my really bad drawing. So the idea basically is this. If one of my enemies come closer to the base, that is, if it crosses 400, I want it to drop down to 2000. But since my screen size is just 800 is to 600, you won't be able to see it when it drops down to 2000, which essentially means that it disappears from our screen. So once it disappears from our screen, I want my game over text to be displayed. So this is what I've given here in code. So if enemy y of I is greater than 400, for j in range num of enemies, enemy y of j is equal to 2000. So I want my enemies to drop to 2000 if it crosses 400. And once the for loop happens, I'm going to make sure my game over text is displayed. And then I give the break statement over here because I don't want the loop to keep running. I want it to just break out of the loop. So I'm going to copy this again and paste it in our code. Yeah, here's the command line game over. This should come under the for loop for I in range num of enemies so that it will work effectively. Or else you'll be getting error after error, which you can't be rectifying it. So that's pretty much it. We got our game over text. So now it's time for me to run my screen. So I'm just going to wait till like my enemy drops down to like 400. Till I'm just going to keep shooting my other enemies which are like apart. Apologies for my truly optimal aim. I'm like really terrible at this. I can see that. So enemies are coming closer and closer. Wait, it should be displayed. Let me try that again. Okay. Not sure why isn't it displaying on my screen. I know where exactly I went wrong, but I am supposed to get my game over text. Let me try running. Wait, let me give a different distance. So I'm just going to give it 220 to make sure we're done with it. I'm not able to see that. Okay, I guess there's something wrong with my PyCharm, but the program here is more or less correct, but it's like my PyCharm isn't working. So I just like try presenting that once I implemented my sounds as well. So you guys have seen me play the game, but you do feel that there's something lacking, isn't it? Something is missing, right? So that is because there isn't like any sounds while we play our game. So to rectify that, I'm going to right now teach you guys how to implement background music and the appropriate background sounds. Now in our Pygame, we're going to use three fonts, three background scores, namely the background music, which plays infinitely when we shoot our enemies, our firing sounds when we shoot the bullets from our spaceship, and our explosion sounds when the bullet hits our enemy. Now first, we're just going to deal with how we're going to implement our background music. So in order for that to work, we first need to import mixer. So syntax for that will be from a Pygame import mixer. So I'm just going to copy that and paste that alone for now, just to see, just show you guys that it's a pretty crucial step. And because of that, if it's not there, then you guys won't be able to import your background sounds. So once we did that, we're going to deal with how we're going to import our background music. So for that, we need to do two steps. One is loading our music and the other is playing them. To load our music, I'm going to use this library function called as mixer.music.load. And inside, I've given my location of my music file in read mode. So I've downloaded a WAV file just for this purpose. So I'm going to give this. And the mixer.music.play over here makes sure that it plays infinitely. And I give -1 inside the brackets just because of that. So I'm going to copy this. Copy. So I've given the command line BGM. So I'm going to paste this. The next would be our firing sound. So I file in read mode, my firing sound in read mode. And then I make sure it plays by using the variable I created, .play. So I'm going to copy this. Okay. So right over here. So now I want my sound to be played if every time a bullet is fired. So I'm just going to give this under the if statement, if bullet state is equal to ready, so that my bullet will be fired and the sound will be heard. So I'm going to copy paste this right over here. Okay. And then implementing our explosion sound is like very much similar to the previous syntax. We just create a variable called as explosion_sound, and using mixer.sound, I load my WAV file in read mode, and then I make sure it plays by using the variable I created, which is explosion_sound.play. Now I want. Okay. Now I want this to be played every time a bullet collides with our enemy. So I'm just going to give this under the if statement, if collision. So here I've created a command line yet again. And once our bullet collides with our enemy, I want this sound to be played. Here I'm going to start a bracket. I paste it once again. Okay, with that, you guys will be able to hear it. I'm just going to see where I went wrong with my game over font. 70, and then right, I forgot to blip my font inside my screen. My bad. So after rendering, you're supposed to blip your text, which I pretty much forgot to do. Apologies on my side. So once I copy this, I hit enter, and then I paste it. So I think right now we'll be good to go. I'm just going to change my over here to the initial value of 400. And before you guys could hear the sounds, I'm just going to go change my mic so that you guys will be able to hear it. Okay. So I'm going to go to settings. And I'm changing my mic to speak. My mic, you guys wouldn't be able to hear me. So which is what I said. And if I only switch my mic, you guys are able to hear the audio sounds as well. So that's why I'm switching it to stereo.
You guys could notice there's 3 different sounds, and when they reach the base, you get game over.
The explanation. Now, as she said, once our enemies cross 400, our game over text should appear, which appears finally after a teeny tiny mistake I made. So with that, we've successfully created our Pi game from scratch. Now, before I could wind up the session, I'm just going to give a quick summary on what we did so far in a Pi game. So first, I'm going to explain these 4 lines. We imported 4 libraries, that is Pygame, Random, Math, and Mixer. Only after we imported Pygame, we were able to initialize the Pygame module. And only after importing Random, we were able to make sure our enemies respawned in random places after shooting them. Importing Math made sure that we were able to use all these mathematical functions that we used in our program. And Mixer made sure that we were able to load and use our background music. So over here, here's a statement, pygame.init, which means that we're initializing our pygame. Over here, we'll create a variable called as screen, and we'll display the size of the screen, which, as I said before, 800 to 600. That is 800 in the x-axis and 600 in the y-axis. Now here is the background variable, and here we've loaded our background image, as you guys see. Over here, we've created a score font, which I've explained it like in the very beginning. The game over font, which I've again explained at the beginning. And both of them are like pretty much the same. So there's like nothing really to explain. We're just going to load the font and give the coordinates. Next is a background score, which again, we're going to load the background file, and then we're going to make sure to place infinitely. That's why I gave -1. So here is the title and logo. Same stuff. We're going to first use this statement to make sure we change the name of our game to Space Invaders. And using the icon variable, we load our icon image in read mode, and then we make sure we display using pygame.display.set_icon. Now here are the coordinates for our player. We first load our player image using this variable called as variable player image, and then we give the size coordinates of our player x, player y, that is the x and the y axis, and we've initialized player x underscore change is equal to 0. The same can be seen are done to our enemies, as my partner Jamuna earlier said. So here why we've created list is that we are going to deal with multiple enemies, not just one. So we want all these enemies to have these attributes which are given in the for loop, so which is why we have these lists. Over here we have our bullet attributes where we've loaded a bullet image. We've given the coordinates for a bullet, that is x-axis 0 pixels and y-axis 480 pixels. And bullet x change, bullet y change is 0 and 0.5. And here we've given a bullet state which is ready. Over here we've initialized the score value to 0 so that later it can be iterated each time we shoot an enemy. So here we've defined a couple of functions Player, enemy, fire bullet, show score, game over text, and is collision. In player and enemy, we make sure that we blit or we draw a player and enemy into our background. Show score and game over are stuff which I explained earlier, so that doesn't really require explanation. Fire bullet is just making sure our bullet image is like pasted and giving the coordinates for which like where it can show the bullet. And is collision over here is something that my partner Jamuna earlier explained. We use the math formula to make sure that the bullet collides with our enemy. So over here, like I said before, like I said a couple of minutes earlier, anything which we want to persist on screen should be given inside the while loop. And that's what we're given over here. If running is equal to true, that is, if our game is running, we make sure the while loop is implemented. So inside the while loop, we'll see what is going on. We'll first see screen.fill, which is our RGB value, and then we blit our background image using screen.blit. And over here is a keystroke section where we assign each key for each function. So if we press our left key, our spaceship moves. If we release it, it stops. Similarly, if we press our right key, the spaceship moves to the right. And if we release it, it stops, just like that. And if we press spacebar, our bullets will be shot from our spaceship. And if we release the spacebar key, it will be stopped. We won't be able to shoot bullets. So that's what we've given over here in our keystroke. And we're also given the bullet sounds every time we fire a bullet, which I've explained it just like a couple of seconds ago. Over here is our player movement. We're given like the coordinates. If player X is less than or equal to 0, it should appear in this position. And if player X is greater than or equal to 736, it should appear in this position. The same we've done for our enemy movement as well, except it's inside the for loop because we're dealing with many number of enemies over here. So once we did that, we're going to go to the collision section where we give all of the attributes to make sure that collision happens, to make sure that our bullet collides with the enemy. And here we have our bullet movement and our bullet state. Over here, we've called our functions player and show score. And finally, here is the statement pygame.display.update so that it makes sure that all of these changes will be implemented in our game. So if this statement doesn't exist, our pygame wouldn't work. All we get is like a blank screen. So which is why this statement is extremely crucial. So once we have implemented all these statements, all these functions, all of these variables, and make sure that it works, we would have successfully created our Space Invaders game from scratch. So with that, I would like to wind up the session. Thank you guys for listening to us. Thank you guys for sticking with us for the last 6 days. And with that, I'm going to wind up my session. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to post them. We'll be addressing that later.
Thank you, Reshma. It was an amazing session. Now I hand it over to Ms. Denisha for the question and answer session.
Thank you, Anjana. So the first set of questions is to Ms. Jamuna. When do you say that the bullet and the enemy has collided?
Okay, so what you do is you use the distance formula and you calculate the distance between the bullet and the enemy. Okay, so when it's in a sufficient amount of distance, you say it has collided. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay. The second question is, how do you get the enemy to respawn?
Okay, so for that we use a function called randin. So in order to use that function, you need to import the random function, the random library. Okay, so if you use that in the random function, you can specify in which coordinates you want the enemy or like any other thing to come at. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So the next question is, what do you mean when the bullet state is ready?
Okay. So what do you mean by bullet state is ready is necessarily that the bullet isn't on the screen yet. That means the bullet is ready to be shot, but it's not on the screen yet. So when you press the space bar, the bullet will get fired. Okay. Any other question?
Cool. Then the other question is, what do you mean when the bullet state is fire?
Okay. As I said, there's only 2 states for the bullet. It's either ready or fire. So ready means the bullet isn't on the screen yet. Fire means the bullet is on the screen and you can't shoot another bullet until the bullet is off the screen. So the bullet has to either collide with the enemy or it has to leave the game window. Okay, so
Yeah, that's it, Jamuna. Thank you so much. And the other set of questions is to Miss Reshma. So your first question is, how do you play music on repeat in Python?
So to answer that, let me first present. Okay, it's already presented. So I'm just going to go to my Word document. Now, like I said before, in order for the music to play infinitely, I give my value over here as -1. So you may wonder, why -1? Why can't it be 0 or any positive value? The thing is that if I give 0 over here instead of -1, it will only play for like once and then it will not play at all. It will stop playing. If I give 1, it will play once. If I give 2, it will play only twice and then stop. If I give 3, it will play only thrice and then stop. Just like that, if I give any n positive value, the music will play for n number of times and then it will stop completely. It will not play at all. So just for that, we give -1 or any negative value because you can't really repeat anything that's negative, right? So that's why over here we give -1 to make sure that our music plays infinitely on loop without having any breaks or without stopping completely. So that's that.
Okay, so the next question is, how is render function different from screen blend function?
Yeah, I've been like meaning to tell you guys this. Render and lit are like two different things. Now, if you've noticed in our previous sessions, we would have just blitted our player, we would have just blitted our enemy, or we would have just blitted our bullet. But over here, we use two statements, that is the render statement and the other is the screen blit statement. The reason why is that Python does not give you the feature to directly blit your font in your background image or in your Pygame surface. So just for that, we use the render function so that the font can be converted into a surface, and that surface in turn will be blitted on screen using screen.blit. So that's like the major difference between render and screen.blit.
Okay, so the next question is, what's the difference between mixer music load function and mixer sound function?
Now, mixer music load is used for these longer lasting sounds like your BGMs, while mixer.sound is just used for these short sounds like shooting a bullet, explosion sounds, gunshots, something like that. So anything which is like, pretty short and which is only played when we like, perform an action can be used using mixer.sound. We can like load that using mixer.sound, while longer lasting musics like your background music can be loaded using mixer.music.load. So that's the difference between mixer.music.load and mixer.sound. See, there are like high chances option and you guys to use too.
Okay, so that's it for the questions, Reshma. Thank you so much. And over to Anjana.
So before ending this successful efforts in bringing this platform, last but not the least, my heartfelt thanks to all the participants for their kind participation and patient listening. Thank you.
Sridharan and Vinod sir. Sir.